Clinical demands on anesthesia providers are severe, with CRNA burnout rates reaching 72%. Concurrently, surgical volume is migrating to outpatient centers. Escaping these pressures, thousands transition to 1099 independent roles for schedule control and high baseline rates, standardizing at $200 per hour. But generating a high gross revenue is entirely separate from retaining it. Operating outside the W-2 system exposes that income to immediate structural liabilities. The core error providers make is assuming that decades of rigorous clinical training automatically translate to business proficiency. They do not. Legally and financially, a 1099 provider is a standalone corporation. The malpractice risks, employment taxes, and operational costs previously absorbed by the hospital are now transferred directly to the individual. To secure the capital generated in the operating room, we must conduct a dual audit, an aggressive deconstruction of the two critical fail points that drain independent revenue, the services contract and the tax entity. Without optimizing both of these systems, a premium hourly rate is an illusion. Capturing the true value of independence requires actively engineering a tight legal and financial perimeter. Without it, the contracting facility and the IRS simply siphon off the premium. Phase 1 of the dual audit plugs the holes in your legal perimeter where revenue bleeds out. Using clinical strategist Richard Graff's contract compliance framework, we can isolate the toxic boilerplate language hidden inside standard anesthesia agreements. The most expensive contractual trap is Section 10, which mandates tail coverage under a claims-made malpractice policy. Claims-made policies have a mechanical flaw. They only defend against lawsuits filed while the premiums are actively being paid. When you exit a facility, you're forced to buy an extended reporting period out of pocket to cover any future litigation arising from your past cases. The countermeasures are strict. Mandate an occurrence-based policy upfront, or require the facility to pay for the tail if they terminate your contract without cause. The second major trap is Section 19, one-way indemnification. Standard indemnification clauses force the provider to financially shield the facility from clinical mistakes, but offer zero reciprocal protection to the provider. If an anesthesia machine fails and the provider is named in the lawsuit, the provider pays their own legal defense while the facility remains insulated. This requires a mandatory negotiation demand. Explicit mutual indemnification must be written directly into the agreement. Signing an unnegotiated standard contract mathematically erases the locum rate premium by secretly transferring institutional risk entirely onto the individual. The final critical contract trap is Section 16, the system non-compete. A standard non-compete restricts practice within a specific radius, but parent health system language weaponizes that geography, transforming a local restriction into a regional ban. This creates an economic exile. It forces locum providers to either commute unreasonable distances across state lines or accept suppressed lowball rates at their current facility because they cannot work anywhere else nearby. The strict negotiation parameters are to restrict the radius to 15 miles and explicitly strike out any clauses referencing parent system facilities. Protecting your future geographic mobility and right to work is exactly as critical as negotiating your current hourly rate. Phase 2 of the dual audit evaluates the tax architecture. Operating a high-grossing locum practice inside of basic sole proprietorship is structurally negligent. To measure capital retention, we use the 4-tier tax pyramid. Tier 1 exposes the baseline risk. The specified service, trade, or business classification is an IRS rule targeting high-earning medical professionals. When your income crosses thresholds of $276,775 for a single filer or $553,500 married, the standard 20% qualified business income deduction rapidly drops to zero. Your CPA must proactively plan around this phase-out, or you default to the highest possible marginal tax rate. Ascending the pyramid brings us to the single most powerful financial lever for an independent provider, Tier 2, S-Corp optimization. An S-Corp election bifurcates your single stream of clinical income into two legally distinct channels. Shielding those distributions from the 15.3% self-employment tax routinely saves high-earning providers up to $40,000 annually. However, the designated W-2 salary portion must be backed by a 4-factor analysis to survive IRS scrutiny. Moving from a Tier 1 sole proprietorship to an optimized Tier 2 S-Corp is the most critical structural upgrade a 1099 provider can execute. The apex of the pyramid, Tiers 3 and 4, is strictly reserved for providers clearing $300,000 to $600,000 in net income. At this level, you can execute aggressive pre-tax sheltering by stacking a cash balance pension plan directly on top of a solo 401k. This bracket also opens up the short-term rental loophole, a strategy for generating massive paper losses from real estate to offset active clinical income. But the IRS heavily audits this specific loophole for medical professionals. To prove material participation and survive an audit, meticulous, contemporaneous time logs of your management hours are legally mandatory. Advanced tax architecture yields massive wealth retention, but it requires equally rigorous documentation and specialized CPA oversight to remain legally bulletproof. Bringing the dual audit to a close requires comparing the outcomes of these two models side by side. First is the standard licensed provider. This is an unoptimized sole proprietor, absorbing claims-made tail risk and paying maximum unmitigated FICA taxes. Contrast this with the proficient provider. This model utilizes an optimized S-Corp, enforces mutual indemnification, and shelters capital in stacked pensions. The delta between these two columns is stark. The optimized structure retains an additional $60,000 to $100,000 in annual capital, combined with zero uncovered legal exposure. Professional autonomy is a product of absolute control over your liability and your capital. Choosing your own shifts is merely the entry point. Audit your current contracts, demand mutual indemnification, refuse uncovered tail liabilities, and mandate precise tax tiering. Do not let your advanced clinical expertise serve merely to subsidize a corporate facility's bottom line or overfund the IRS. Architect your entity and capture the true value of your independence.